Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you here on this early morning at Wild Goose. We're so grateful to be here after 18 months of being away from each other. You are at the Shameless Parenting, Sex, and Other Touchy Subjects. So thanks for being daring and courageous, too. I am Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers, and on top of being a Christian, I am also a sex therapist and a family therapist and was a professor for a really long time. And this is kind of my jam. And I am so grateful to be here with my co-presenter, who I will let introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Brian McLaren. Glad to be with you all. Glad to be here working with Tina. I'm just thinking how much fun it must be to introduce yourself as a sex therapist. And I'm also wondering if this, like lawyers have people ask for free lawyer advice and doctors. Anyway, we don't need to get into that. But
I sit down on airplanes and immediately my earbuds go in. So that's how it happens. So what we're going to attempt to do today, and I know we only have about 50 minutes, we're going to do more than, or we're going to try to get done as much as we can. But we're going to try to share with you a little bit about developmental information about how kids grow up and a little bit about some of the behavioral and emotional tasks that they face at each individual stage that they go through, but also what are the sexual and sensual curiosities that they have at each age, and what are what I call 100 one-minute conversations that you really want to be having along the way, not the talk. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And the reason that we do that is that when kids have someone around that is aware of these different phases and stages that they go through, kids actually respect themselves more, they value themselves more, they know how to protect themselves better, they're actually able to recognize exploitation when it happens, so it's one of the ways that we help our kids protect themselves. They know how to care for their bodies, and they actually know how to support other people in caring for their bodies too. They know how to give consent. They also know how to withdraw consent, which we really want our kids to understand. The other thing is we help them to develop media literacy, and that is a critical thing that we want our kids to know how to do now, especially as they're growing up. So what research tells us is that when we help our kids grow up with these 100 one-minute conversations, that they get involved with sex later, they make safer sexual choices, they have lower STI and teen pregnancy rates, they end up in more egalitarian, more loving relationships. They tend to marry later. They choose more compatible partners. They have lower divorce rates. And they have more satisfying, varied sexual relationships when they're older adults because they've learned to speak about these things in relationship to themselves, others, and the world, which is something that most of us don't have those skills with when we don't grow up with this. So I've been doing this work forever and a day. And what I have learned in my research is about 90 to 95% of people grow up in homes that are silent or silent and shaming. So if that was your home, you are in really, really good company. So, Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've noticed in your career?
yeah, so I should say folks who are my age and older and who had especially a Christian background, we were exposed to certain very powerful and popular almost Christian celebrities and so-called experts through radio shows like Focus on the Family and so on. And I remember being a young parent thinking, I got a master's degree in literature. I know how to interpret texts, but I'm suddenly a father, and all I have to go on is what my parents taught me. And I was in a family that there was not much shaming, but really not much talk about sex ever. Somebody asked me what I ever heard as a child about homosexuality, and I said I just never heard of sexuality. It just wasn't talked about. But when these, very popular voices in this whole movement, some of you may have heard of, that Tina's written brilliantly about, called, quote, purity culture, rose up. I mean, just hear that word purity and think of the opposite of purity, and you're into the language of shaming. What was unfortunate was people claiming to be psychologists, who were, bona fide degreed psychologists, were working on really bad psychological data. And what they were really teaching that we didn't realize was they were teaching a kind of authoritarian parenting or patriarchal parenting. And it just feels to me like a whole lot of people now know that that doesn't work. And now we're moving into an era where we have to get the best state-of-the-art psychological information we can, accurate data to help us. And that's what I appreciate so much about the information Tina has to share.
So one of the things that most people don't know, and it actually is a really terrible secret, is that in the this part's not so much of a secret, but in the last 40 years in the United States, we have had abstinence-only education, right? So in the beginning in 1980, we removed most of the research on sexuality from just plain old research in the United States. And then we started removing what sex education or comprehensive sex education we had prior to 1980, and we started influxing Gad's amount of money into abstinence education, which we have now done research on. 80% was medically inaccurate, okay? So that means we were withdrawing hardcore knowledge from the general public. Then what was happening was, you have to understand, then that means that all the people growing up, which includes your providers, so your psychologists, your physicians, your marriage and family therapists, so your couples counselors, all of those people who are going through school, they actually don't get courses in human sexuality. At most, they will get one course in human sexuality. And that course, there's no requirements on what that course has to cover. So if you are a therapist or a physician and you actually want training in sexual health and what your sexual biases are, you have to do postgraduate specialized training in that. And most people don't know that. Like, that's a secret we ought to be letting people know. So I actually run an institute training professionals on sexual health and what your sexual biases are, because I think it is so important that when people go see professionals, because who do we go see when we have sexual concerns? Clergy, physicians, and therapists. And those people will hand out advice or knowledge, but it's coming from their life experience, unless they've done extra training. So this is actually really important because we use our bodies and our hearts to express intimacy. So it's really important that we actually have this knowledge, right? And this is why understanding the stuff that we're going to talk about today is so important. And what's even more important is that we help parents be the resources that their kids need them to be, so that we're raising them up, right, from little ones all the way up, so then the kids, when they're parents, then their default, what I call their default setting, is to do this for their own kids, right? It's not the scaredness that most of us feel when we're like, all I know is I don't want to do what my parents did to me, but I have no idea what to do. And that's what most of us feel, right? So that's why I just wrote a book called Shameless Parenting, and I walk you through it all. But it's mostly so I can help parents and help professionals to be able to help parents do it better. So one of the things I want to ask before we move forward is, maybe you can help us know exactly what to cover today. If you have kids birth to 2, raise your hands. Okay, 1. 2 to 4. Okay, yes, of course. Yes, of course. Of course. Grandparents, 2. 2 to 4. Okay, thanks. 4 to 6. Okay, big chunk. 6 to 8. Okay. 8 to 10. Okay. 10 to 12. 12 to 15. 15 to 18. Okay. What I want you to know is in the very back table there's going to be an introduction sheet on how you use these, what I call cheat sheets. And then there's a cheat sheet for every age group. So if we don't cover your particular age group, we're going to get to the ones where there's the most. Then you go back and pick up one. If we happen to run out, you just email me. I'll get it to you like this, okay? These cheat sheets that are there, the same information is in the book, where it covers all the ages, but these cheat sheets are also going to be available for professionals to download, and you're welcome to share these with any professional in your community, any teacher, any physician, anybody, okay? Because they're there to help you and help parents. Okay, so anything you want to add? Okay, so let's go on to 4 to 6. Yep, okay. We're going to jump to 4 to 6 because there was a whole bunch of you there. 4 to 6 is the identity and power stage. How many of you noticed that? They're kind of into letting you know who they are. They got some pretty big feelings. Yeah. I have a almost 4-year-old granddaughter, and she's running the world right now. So she's just got it all figured out. In that age range, what they are and have been discovering about their bodies. So we figure out we can get our hand where we want it to go a little bit earlier than that. We discover our genitals a little bit earlier than that. We decide they're our favorite parts of our bodies about a year before that. Yeah? You with me? Yeah? Right around 4, they can actually begin to learn about private spaces. Okay? So they can begin learning that, yes, of course that's a wonderful part of your body. We have such a loving God that gives you that wonderful part of your body to be with you all the time. Right? Just, we're not going to touch it in the grocery store. We're going to wait till we go home, and the private spaces of our home are our bedroom or our bathroom. And you know what? Mommy and daddy, or mommy and mommy, daddy, whatever, we use those places too. Okay? So that's part of how you can talk about it in a way that's just about private spaces. And we talk about these things like picking your nose, right? Or other things, going to the bathroom, right? It's just private spaces. And again, you're teaching them about these are social mores in our culture. That's no different, right? I could tell you many stories, but you might have some fun stories that you remember of your little ones.
Well, but I just want to underline, though, what a beautiful way to say it. You understand, it wasn't just the prohibition. It was the permission and the celebration. And that, one thing I think we can be sure of, anytime you give a prohibition, it complicates things, and it actually increases the almost obsession with it. And to add to the to turn the prohibition into a permission and an appropriateness and an opportunity. What a liberation that is. Yeah.
Well, and you try to tell a 4-year-old not to do something, and you can bet they're going to do it more, right? Because they are all about identity and power. That is the task that they are about, right? In their beginning of their individuation, they're at the beginning of, who am I apart from you? Who am I in this world? And the stronger their personality, the more they're trying to figure that out, right? And so you're really trying to help them understand their world. That's a tree. That's an elbow, right? That's a vulva. That's a penis. Great parts, great things, great world, right? And so you're really wanting to help them understand how these parts of their world relate to them, right? The prohibition is just like, oh yeah, I'll show ya. Right? Because that's part of what they're trying to do. The other thing I want to say about 4 to 6 is this is also the time of we call doctor playing doctor, right? That came about really naturally because kids begin to be curious about other. Okay? I'm beginning to know who I am, but who are you? What's your body like? This is, again, natural curiosity, right? So the thing to know is they're going to be exploring. That's fine. That's natural. The key thing to know is kids need to be playing with kids their own age, between 15, not older than 18, 15 months older than them. The reason for that is you're not going to see manipulation, right, or power differentials at that age. They're going to be right about the same curiosity stage. You get much older than that, and then you've got somebody who knows more or is bigger, and then coercion and manipulation can happen. Now, is that a bad thing? No. We all want what we want, same as adults. We just want to save our kids from having to deal with it. Okay, so that's why we have really good supervision if they're playing with somebody older than 18 months their own age. Follow? Yeah. Anything you want to add to that?
I'm just thinking to say it's a child's job to learn about their power and identity. And this management of power, in the authoritarian parenting many of us were exposed to, the power of the child is seen as a threat to the power of the parent. So the parent has got to discipline and control and inhibit the power. But what I love about this is this sense, no, we want you to be able to explore the appropriate level of power that is part of your right. Like you think, somebody goes from not existing in the world to having to carve out a place for themselves. And then they're faced with the danger of other people who might want to infringe upon their space. So it's just, to me, this is such a healthy way to look at it.
Right. And it's really true. Like, I have two that are 5 years apart. And I remember, and the older one is a boy, and I remember saying to my older one, helping him understand his power differential with his younger sister. So it'd be things like, I remember one time Christian, the older one, said, "I'll give you a sucker if you clean my room." And I remember saying to him, now, if the roles were reversed, if the shoe was on the other foot, would that feel fair to you? And he goes, nah, not really. And I'm like, okay, that's called an abuse of power. That's you using your age and your size to get one up on your sister, but she thinks you walk on water. Of course she does. But you don't get to do that. So this is me helping him understand his power in relationship to her. And there were many opportunities that I could do that. And we talked about that when he was in his 20s, about the role that that played in his own life in helping him learn to assess himself in relationship to other, which was an important thing in his own life, when to use it and when not to use it. Yeah? Okay. Let's talk about 6 to 8. Okay. This is the I am me and you are you phase. This is body autonomy. And this is really one of the places where we begin to introduce media literacy. So when you're watching TV, you want to be asking questions. Who created this? Who was it for? Who is it not for? Who's included? Who's not included? Who's behind the camera? Who's paying for this? You get them thinking about media as a commercially produced thing. Right? And you just begin those conversations because this helps them develop critical thinking. And you're going to continue this along the way, okay? It's also a place where you begin helping them understand or discern who is trustworthy and who is not, and how you discern that, okay? Then again, you continue with the supervision, right? Really looking at who are they playing with and the age differentials, because their curiosity is normal. Their curiosity is good, right? I often think of it as the seat of their genius. The seat of their creative genius is their curiosity, but it's your job to make sure that where their curiosity is being expressed is safe. That's your job to do, okay? So that they can be all kinds of curious. Do you have something you want to share?
Well, I'm just remembering my own childhood, and this was the age where I became super interested in animals, and I think my interest in sex happened watching the animal world before it involved the human world. And then I remember the sort of logical hold it, what do people do? And but I think that curiosity for me went to animals first, and then then sort of reflected back on human beings.
I love that. I had so many students, so I taught the graduate level human sexuality class for about 30 years in a marriage and family therapy program. And I would have a lot of people who grew up in farms, or when I did have people who grew up in farms, they often had a really healthy view of sexuality because they grew up watching animals. So to them, it was just a part of life,
yes.
Right? And I think that that's actually a really beautiful way in which nature can teach you that this is just a part of life.
Yes. And this, I think, is where, again, many of us grew up in settings where our religious world made everything shame-oriented and morally laden. So a word like curiosity or power never came in. It was always a question of right or wrong, or issues of developmental stage and appropriateness to that developmental stage. All of this, to me, just in a sense puts us in a different paradigm to think about our work as human beings and our work as parents and grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I often like to talk about is remember that as we talk about what is typical at different stages, that when kids are doing what they're doing, they're fulfilling their job description.
Yeah.
So even when they're pushing against you, they're not doing that to be ornery. They're doing that to grow up, to learn about their world. And part of learning about their world is, where is the boundary? Where is the boundary? Your job is to lovingly hold it and say, yeah, well, of course you're trying to get that. It's just not safe for you to have that yet. Okay? They're not trying to be awful. They're not trying to manipulate. Of course they want what they want. We all do. But it's not safe for them to have that yet. So I would so often say to my child or our kids, well, of course you're mad at me. You're fulfilling your job description. And guess what? You still don't get it. But of course you want it, right? You're 16. You're supposed to want it. And I'm supposed to not give it to you, right? And they joke about it now, how often I would say, you're fulfilling your job description. And bummer for you. So 6 to 8, I want to talk about that for a little minute. This is a time where they are beginning to hear a lot about sex at school, okay? So a lot of times parents are like, yeah, not yet, right? And I'm like, yeah, a lot. It's happening a lot, okay? Kids are getting introduced to pornography, free pornography, by 9, and sometimes sooner, okay? So yes, you need to be talking about, there are things on the internet that might scare you. It's often when people are naked. They may be doing things that are actually not much about reality. And if you see something that scares you, I really do want you to come home and talk about it, because I'd like to be able to explain it to you, okay? Because a lot of the things that are out there that people can see aren't really typical to what is typical in people's lives. It's just that we live in a world where things can get out there and they can be easily accessed. And your friends may tell you that it's something that it's actually really not. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we call pornography and what it is. But I also want you to know that it may make you feel funny inside. It also might be really intriguing and super interesting. That's okay too, okay? I just want the chance to explain it a little bit more to you, okay? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, and I think kids get this, especially if they, watch cartoons and so on, and you can use examples from other parts of life. Like, how when that one guy hit the other guy with a hammer on the head and his eyes popped out and then came back in and you laughed? That's not real. You hit somebody on the head and they go to the hospital, right? So there's a lot of stuff that you see on television or on a screen that is not realistic. And it's nice to be able to check out what's trustworthy.
That's right. And that is a really great way to talk about it, and you can talk about it with those kinds of examples all along, like Spider-Man gets to fly or Superman gets to fly. Do we get to fly when we jump off, buildings? No, not so much. Would it be cool to? Of course, but we don't, right? Or you don't teach somebody to drive a car like Fast and Furious, right? Yeah, not so much, right? So there's all kinds of ways that we talk about what we might enjoy watching but it's not reality, and we don't want to base what we're watching on reality either. I talk about a little bit in the book in this phase about how to introduce safe internet usage and what the criteria of that is. And I'm not going to go into it here, but it is something that you do want to be talking about, how to have safe internet usage. Okay, so kids actually develop that as a skill because it is a skill that we now need. Okay, all right. So let's talk about 10 to 12-year-olds. They're continuing what I call the rules and structure phase. And so kids are, if you ever notice, they're starting to tell you how to do things like you're driving too fast, slow down, take your foot off the accelerator. Do you ever get that? I would get that all the time. Crushes are emerging. Sometimes they can emerge at the stage before, but they're emerging. One thing I didn't talk about that I do want to say is that gender identity can begin to emerge as early as 5. Okay, so a little different than attraction. Attraction can emerge 7, 8, 9, but gender identity can emerge a lot sooner. Not for all kids, but for some. So if you have a child who and you're not going to necessarily know it if they are matching what they were assigned at birth, but if it's not matching what they were assigned at birth and it's strong and it starts to emerge at 5 and 6 or whatever, please listen. And I talk about this in 3 different sections in the book. Please listen, and please let them be however they are, okay? Do not push against that, because kids where it's strong and it doesn't match who they were at birth, they can be suicidal within 3 to 4 years, okay? So please listen to them. And if you need support, get a pediatrician who knows or get a therapist that knows, and just get the support that you need, okay? And I talk about this in different places in the book. Kids are kids. Kids know. Some kids really know themselves really well, and you just need to listen to them. You know, they have their own body wisdom, okay? So go ahead. Do you have anything you want to add to that? All right. Again, you want to be reinforcing safe internet usage. And 6 to 8, actually, some puberty changes can begin for girls in particular. So you want to be kind of start talking about puberty and that puberty's coming and how the body's going to change, and that might be kind of weird, and here's how the changes are going to be. And so this becomes a conversation that's just going to, again, happen in little sound bites, right? 1 minute, 2 minute tops, but you're having them all the time, every other week, you know, several times during the month. You're having them. So it's just a part of life. You want your children to never remember that you had a talk. Right? Never. And what I talk about in the book is at the end of every section, which is birth to 2, 2 to 4, blah, 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 I give you a whole list of here's the books you want to have in your house for you and your kid, and you want them sitting around. They're the top ones right now. You want to have them, okay? Because your kids will be like, oh, this is so great. Look at the funny pictures. Please read this to me. You know, you're going to make it normal because this is what growing up is all about. It's not a thing over there. It's a part of me. It's a part of who I am. It's a part of growing up. So we go on to, do you want to get something?
Let me just say, again, thinking about historical background for this, it feels like what we're talking about here is so different than what our culture has for the last 400 or 500, 600 years. And if maybe we could just think, everybody's had to deal with sex as long as there have been human beings, every culture, and sex can cause a lot of trouble. It can, a lot of things can happen that complicate life. But if we can just maybe have in the back of our mind that an awful lot of the sexual mores of our culture have more to do with patriarchy than they have to do with sex. They have to do with a dominance hierarchies of powerful, usually men and usually white men in Western civilization. But all of this patriarchy created a whole set of rules that are so deeply baked into almost all of us. And what we're trying to imagine is a different, and what we were told in that pyramid of domination was anything outside of this pyramid is immoral, right? This is the standard of morality. And so anybody who would depart from that is seen as being immoral. But no, what we're saying is we actually think there's immorality in that domination paradigm. And we're trying to help establish a different understanding of morality that is deeply theological and is deeply spiritual and is deeply humane and wise and science-based. So, yeah.
And it really honors that God created the human to develop in these ways over time. And so we're teaching the child, you were made on purpose. You were made to develop this way on purpose. And I'm here to help you understand yourself as wise and beautiful and divinely created. And the way I can do that is by helping you understand you and appreciate you and value you. And what we know is that when kids grow up with these 100 one-minute conversations is they protect themselves more. And they're pickier about who comes close and making sure that that person can value them too. And the Northern European countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Holland, Finland, they've been doing this style of sexual health and life education, they call it, for over 60 years. And they have the best statistics across the globe and the kids go to their parents. Their parents are seen as resources. And that's what the research shows, that when kids grow up with their parents being the primary sex educator, kids stay connected to their parents through adolescence. So I'm always saying to parents, if you want your kids connected to you, become the best sex educator. Because kids actually want to hear from their parents. They really do. And parents always think they talk to their kids more than they actually do. Because when you ask the parents, they say one thing. When you ask the kids, they say something different, right? So you want to know how to do this. You want to know how to talk about it. The other things I want to say about 10 to 12-year-olds, because it's a lot, sort of that continuation of the 8 to 10, the 10 to 12-year-olds, there's more puberty happening, there's more things happening at school, there's more things being talked about at school, but this is also a time that kids might start coming out and saying things. There's a whole lot of conversation happening at school right now. Just this last week, one of my supervisees said to me that one of the clients that they had, their 10-year-old came home and said, "Hey, Mom, I just want you to know that I'm non-binary and pansexual." I thought, oh my gosh, do we have something else coming down the road with our parents? They're going to fall over all over the place. They don't know what any of that means, right? We have got to help parents become educated, because what we don't want is for them to be like, I'm getting you to a therapist tomorrow. You know, like something's wrong with you. Nothing's wrong. They're just hearing all kinds of things at school, you know, and you just want to say, great, okay. Well, however you are is fine. I'm going to love you however you are. If that stays that way, great. If you keep changing 100 times, that's great. I'm just going to love you. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to love you, see you, know you, accept you, and love you. That's what I'm here to do. And you just know that they're 10. They're going to keep changing, just like you did. You're not going to, even though they're going to feel the need to put themselves in a box, you're going to say, okay, be in a box, but you also don't have to be in a box. But you're not going to say that, but you're going to say with your okay, that okay, right? Because they're going to feel the need, because they're hearing all these things, that they got to define themselves, right? Because they're doing this about identity, right? Structure, identity, who am I, right? That's what they're about. Okay, 12 to 15. Identity, separation, sexuality, and increased competence. So now the complexity is really starting to heat up here, okay? So this is what I call they're kind of looping around from toddler again, but now it's in relationship to other. So they're going to loop around. It's going to be about me. I want to grow up, but then I'm not sure I do. I want to be independent. Going to be really sassy, but I'm not sure. You know, they're going to do this for a little while, just like when they were 2. But now it's in relationship to their peer group, because they're trying to figure out, who am I in relationship to that world out there outside my family? So this is when you begin to see them doing the pull-away thing, where they might become, some of them, a little less open than they were before. That's in their job description. That's okay. all right, for them to do that. So a lot of times I'm saying to people, try to get as much of your sex education in prior to 12, because they might start to close down a little bit. It's okay if they do. This is the being, doing, and independent thinking. Do you want to add anything? Do you remember anything from these times?
Well, a couple of quick anecdotes. When our children were in this stage, I have some very vivid memories of this push and pull thing going on. At one point, one of my sons, I got up every morning and made breakfast for the kids, made lunch for the kids, to go to school. And so my son comes down and I give him his lunch and say, good morning. And he says, hey, Dad, let's just make an agreement. Please don't talk to me. And I said, what, are you grouchy this morning? He says, no, don't talk to me at all for the foreseeable future. I said, okay. And I can't remember how many weeks went by. And then he said, okay, you can talk to me again. And all I can think of is, for this poor kid, he has a father who happens to be a pastor. Like, he is surrounded with my presence. Even if I don't want to be smothering, just being there. And I think he was sort of throwing down the gauntlet. Do you have enough respect for me to allow me to have some privacy and to not have you in my grill all the time, So, but I don't know where I got this idea, but for a period of time with each of our kids were in this age, I'd say, I'm going to take you out for breakfast, once a week or something like that. So I remember my oldest daughter, we went out to breakfast, and she starts telling me about this boy that she had kissed. And I remember thinking, I'm not comfortable with this, I'm not comfortable with this. But then I thought, well, hold it. That's why we're having this breakfast, so the communication can be open. But I just remember thinking, man, I would have chosen a firing squad other than talking to my parents about this. But I think this idea that when you're a safe person, don't be surprised if they take you up on it.
It's so true. It's so true. I can remember my 12-year-old daughter coming up to me, 6th grade, right? I'm a sex therapist. And she says to me, Mom, just need to let you know I'm bi. I was like, okay, all right, okay. And she goes, and I told my brother, I'm like, okay. And inside I'm like, all right, okay, I can do this. I can do this. And I knew for sure her father was not going to be able to do it. So I knew I really had to do it, But it's, so funny. It can be, even harder when it's like, you're the parent. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. It can be just harder when you're the parent. That's... Oh, I just remember another thing I remember from one of my sons. He had a girlfriend in 6th grade, right? And so one night I'd gone down to his room and to say goodnight, and he goes, Mom, just so glad I wasn't born with ovaries. I looked at him and said, can you explain that to me? And he said, so-and-so, his girlfriend, she just called and cried for like an hour on the phone about like what her girlfriends had been saying. He goes, I just don't understand that much emotion. I just don't understand it at all. And so I think it has to do with ovaries. I'm like, okay. Anyway, so they're picking up gender myths, a lot of gender myths. And this is a time when I think it's really good to start talking about what kind of messages are you getting about what it means to be a boy or a man or a girl or a woman or non-binary. What are you learning about this? What's acceptable and not acceptable, in that 12 to 15-year-old range? Who's popular, who's not? What are the messages there? Who's in, who's out? And stuff about diversity is super important along the way. Make sure that your literature, and I talk about this in the book, really has diversity in it, all kinds of diversity in it, okay? That's really important. Make sure your friendship circles have diversity in it, all kinds of diversity, and that's been woven in your conversations along the way too. This will really help your children as they're out in the world to develop some, again, critical thinking and challenging as these more black and white kinds of ways of thinking come down, because they'll come down in their friendship circles, like this is the way to be. And they'll be able to be at home practicing voice about, well, I'm not so sure that that's the only way to be. So 15, we'll go into 15 to 18. This is identity, power, and structure. So again, they're sort of circling around that again, but now in relationship to peers. Who am I as a friend? This is value formation. So it's really good to be having those deeper conversations. They're going to be getting ready to launch. So you want to, in those adolescent years, to be moving away from telling them what to do to asking them what they think. You want to help them grow those muscles that they're going to be relying on outside the home. Who am I as a friend? What are my values? How do I want to be treated? Why is pleasure important? Why do I care about how I treat others? Who do I want to become and why? These kinds of conversations you want to be inviting them into and listening very closely when you're in conversations with them as to what is inside their thinking, right? Because there's all kinds of things happening. I can remember being in the car with my son, which is where I would have my conversations at this point in life, not directly. I wouldn't look him in the eye. And say, because he was the oldest. So I always say your oldest ones are the ones that break the water, break the ground. And he was dating somebody, and I remember saying to him, hey, so how do you know when, girlfriend, I'll make up her name, when Michelle wants to kiss you? How do you know? Because you can't assume that just because she does want to kiss you, because sometimes girls will do something that they don't necessarily want to do. So how do you know? How do you check it out with her? And so we got in a really deep conversation about not making assumptions. Again, getting back to the earlier conversation that we had had many times along the way about power and gender. So we were building on these previous conversations, you see, but they grow in complexity over time. Does that make sense? Yeah. You have some things?
I just want to underline that. Isn't it interesting how much this word power comes up? And the legitimate dimension of power. I'm here, I exist, I have to find out how to claim my power, but then to be aware I can abuse my power, others can abuse their power in relation to me. And so much of our anxiety about sex, and maybe so much of our inherited shame about sex, has a lot more to do with power than sex, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this just gives you a little idea. It goes into much more detail of just some of the highlights of things that you want to be paying attention to at each of the ages, just to be watching for. And then again, I give you lots of resources. And again, these are things to share with the professionals in your community because they don't get that training. But we want to leave a couple of minutes, just a few minutes, for questions that you might have. For Brian and I know we could do a whole day seminar, which would be a blast for us to do and tell you lots of gory stories. Believe me that we barely survived. Like, there's so much more gray underneath this color here. Go ahead.
So we have an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, and we've done a lot of these mini conversations, and he knows about the sperm and the egg, and he knows, that the womb, and he knows babies come out of the vagina, and so does she. He actually explained to his younger sister how menstruation works.
Yay!
When he found a tampon and was like, what is this? And I was like, let me tell you what
Yay, Mom.
he wanted to explain to her, he did a great job. Anyways, we just haven't quite done the P and B talk. Like, that is, we have a book we bought, it's perfectly normal, which is recommended.
Wonderful. Yeah.
It's in our closet, and it's like never the right day to tell him about that. And so, like, what? But there has to be a time when that is shared.
You know what? You are wonderful. You're doing a brilliant job. You know what? There's not a time for a talk. Just like I'm saying, it's all the time. Throw the book out. Put it on a put it out. Yeah. You got your friends coming over. They're like, "What's this?" You're like, "Oh yeah, this is the book that we talk about bodies and sexuality and how it's a wonderful part of life." Put it out. Whoever opens it first. Whoever opens it first, you read the page. Whatever's on it, you're like, "Yeah, it's great." It could be the part of the P and the V. It could be the other part. It could be whatever. Just make it a part of life. Don't make it a talk. You want them to not remember a talk. You want them to remember that there was a book sitting out, maybe, or maybe they won't even remember that there was a book. They'll just remember that it was a part of life. It was like learning to cook spaghetti and learning how to brush your teeth. Don't worry about it. Just put it out. Yep. You got it. Yes, exactly, sweetie. You don't want stress over it. It's a part of life. It's not this compartmentalized thing over there. It's a part of life. It's a part of life. Yeah, you're doing great. Easy peasy. Other questions? Yes, back there.
Dr. Tina, I think a lot of us as adults would have preferred to have a healthier relationship with where therapy entered into the conversation.
Yeah.
And it being a rational resource.
Right.
At what point, and it may be in the book, but this 12 to 15 or even earlier, where do you start to introduce, even in all the effort of being a safe space for your kids, that there are additional impartial safe spaces?
I love that, Jerome. Great. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you funny. My kids grew up with me saying to them, "Oh, you know, babe, you don't have a college fund. You have a therapy fund. Because you have me as your mother." So you can bring it up all the time. I mean, I'd talk about that I went to therapy. I would talk about that there. I mean, I'm a therapist. I would talk about there are resources all over the place. I would talk about the friends in our lives that are resources. I'd say, "Hon, you don't have to just come talk to me. You've got this person, this person, this person. All of them will keep your secrets if you need it to be a secret. They will hold it for you. I want you to know you've got people who love you, who have your back," right? Because there are times by the time they hit sort of the junior high age where, you know, you may not be the person that they want to go to. They want to practice with somebody else. And that's fine. You just want them to know that they got enough safe adult people where the only resources in their life aren't peers who are getting their stuff from, right, the internet or wherever. That's not going to be legit. Yeah.
I was just going to ask Dr. Tina, for the folks who aren't clinicians in the room,
Yeah.
do you have a resource you could point them to know what a trauma-trained therapist may be if they don't know what to look for?
Well, I think oh gosh, that's really good. I think you have to read their bios, honestly. I think you have to. I often recommend that people go to AASECT, which is AASECT, because that's somebody that's often trained in individual, couple, family, and then sex therapy. So they've got a more diverse training. And then you need to read their bio and see that there's some trauma-informed training in there. So thank you all for coming. Please go back and get your handouts. If for any reason you don't get enough, get a hold of us.
Thank you, Tina.
Thanks so much.